The attorney walked into the chamber with a polished stride, papers in hand, rehearsed words echoing in his head. He believed he had mastered the narrative, crafted a closing so airtight that no one could break through. Cameras zoomed in as he adjusted his tie, leaned forward, and launched into his opening volley with confidence dripping from every syllable. The audience listened, some nodding, some rolling their eyes, but everyone sensing the familiar rhythm of a man too sure of himself. The attorney smirked slightly as he delivered what he thought was the knockout point, his voice rising, his rhetoric sharpened like a blade meant to slice his opponent to pieces. For a moment it seemed he had the floor, his argument towering over the chamber like an unshakable wall, but then something cracked. The hero, calm and steady, leaned forward. No wasted words, no bluster. Just a single piercing counterpoint delivered with surgical precision. A fact so clear, so undeniable, it cut through the attorney's crafted performance like lightning shattering glass. The silence that followed was deafening. The attorney blinked, his expression faltering. His once fluid speech stumbled. He shuffled through his papers, desperately seeking a way to patch the hole. But it was too late. The smirk had faded, the confidence unraveling in real time under the weight of truth. Gasps echoed. Phones lit up. The audience could feel it. They were witnessing the very moment a polished argument, rehearsed for days, collapsed in seconds. The attorney, once poised as the dominant voice in the room, now stood exposed, his facade crumbling as swiftly as his words, and in that instant the chamber transformed. What began as his confident monologue ended as his unraveling. The shift so stark that even those who supported him moments earlier leaned back in disbelief. But the real story I send to just that his argument crumbled. That's why it crumbled. And how the truth proved too powerful to contain. Cliffhanger. Because what happened next didn't just silence a man. It sent shockwaves far beyond the courtroom walls. This wasn't just any courtroom exchange. The stakes stretched far beyond one man's ego, far beyond the neatly stacked piles of paper and the flashing cameras pointed at the witness stand. This was a moment of consequence, where democracy's strength was on trial alongside the attorney's credibility. For months, the attorney had sharpened this argument. He had repeated it on news outlets, packaged it for sound bites, and deployed it like a weapon in hearing after hearing. Each time it seemed to work. Each time, his bluster filled the air, overwhelming opponents before they could land a clean strike. To the public watching from a distance, he looked untouchable, a man who could spin and twist words into armor. But the chamber was different today. The nation's eyes were not just watching. They were waiting. The weight of the moment pressed down on every seat, every microphone, every camera. Political commentators had hyped this hearing for weeks. Viewers at home tuned in with popcorn, expecting another round of sharp jabs and smug smirks. They had seen him win before. They assumed they'd see it again. Yet beneath the surface, there was something different. The attorney was confident. Too confident. He didn't see the storm gathering across from him. He didn't notice the hero waiting patiently, armed not with noise but with truth. And that's what raised the stakes. This wasn't just about one false claim or one flawed argument. It was about the very idea of whether lies could continue to go unchallenged in the halls of power. The attorney's strategy wasn't new. Talk louder, talk faster, leave no space for doubt. But this time, silence would be his undoing. The cameras caught the moment. His words, meant to dominate, seemed rehearsed to the point of hollowness. His smirk, meant to project control, came across as arrogance. And all the while, the chamber leaned closer, sensing something seismic was about to happen. For the hero, it wasn't personal. It was bigger. It was about dignity. About the truth being heard in a room where bluster had reigned for too long. About millions watching at home who were tired of feeling silenced, tired of watching arrogance masquerade as authority. The tension was thick. A single question hung in the air. Would this be another performance where arrogance triumphed? Or would this be the moment when the pattern shattered? The attorney leaned harder into his talking points, his voice rising like a preacher at a pulpit. But with each word, he dug deeper into a trap of his own making. He didn't see it yet, but the audience did. They could feel the crescendo building, the dramatic arc bending toward a collision he could not avoid. And when it came, it would not just topple his argument, it would ripple outward, igniting conversations across the country. Cliffhanger. Because when arrogance meets truth in the spotlight of history, only one survives, and the nation was about to see which one. Before his voice thundered across that chamber, before his argument began to unravel in front of millions, the attorney had built a reputation, one crafted carefully, almost like a stage character. He wasn't just an attorney. He was a performer, someone who thrived under the hot lights and rolling cameras. To his supporters, he was a fighter, the man who never backed down. To his critics, he was something else entirely, a manipulator cloaked in charm, a craftsman of half-truths who wielded arrogance as if it were a shield. For years, he had mastered the art of dominating a room. When the cameras were rolling, he leaned into bluster. He raised his voice not to persuade, but to intimidate. He smiled not to disarm, but to mock. In hearing after hearing, courtroom after courtroom, his tactic was always the same: overwhelm opponents with noise until their words drowned in the chaos. It was less law and more theater, less justice and more spectacle. The media played along. Clips of his dramatic monologues went viral, not for their substance but for their swagger. "Watch how he destroys his opponent," the headlines blared. But behind that surface sheen, the cracks were visible. His arguments, once dissected, rarely held water. The foundations of his claims were shaky at best, fabricated at worst. Still, in an era where spectacle often outshouted truth, he thrived. But arrogance has an expiration date. Those who knew him closely understood his contradictions. He spoke about justice but defended the unjust. He promised integrity but cut corners to score headlines. He claimed to fight for the people, yet most of his battles were staged for personal gain, designed to keep him relevant in the political theater rather than in the pursuit of truth. There was another problem. He believed his own act. Over time, the mask fused with the man. The line between confidence and overconfidence blurred. His smirk, once calculated, became instinct. His insults, once rehearsed, became reflex. And as with anyone who believes they can't be beaten, he stopped preparing for the possibility of defeat. This was why his downfall was inevitable. He had created an image so inflated, so dependent on bluster, that the smallest pinprick of truth could make it collapse. And yet, until now, he had escaped unscathed. In smaller hearings, in debates where opponents weren't ready or willing to push back, his tactics worked. He bulldozed through logic, drowned out reason, and walked away victorious in the court of public perception. His confidence grew unchecked, and with it his disdain for anyone who dared to challenge him. But arrogance breeds enemies. People notice hypocrisy. They remember contradictions. They wait for the moment the mask slips. That's exactly what happened on this day. The attorney walked into that chamber believing it would be another easy performance, another stage where he could smirk, posture, and spin his narrative without consequence. He believed the cameras were his allies, that the crowd was his prop, that truth could always be outshouted. What he didn't account for was the presence of someone immune to his act, someone prepared not to play his game but to end it. And so, as he leaned into his signature smirk, as he repeated lines he had rehearsed for weeks, the seeds of his collapse were already planted. He didn't know it yet, but the very habits that had made him powerful, the arrogance, the bluster, the reliance on noise instead of truth, were about to become the very weapons used against him. For years he had lived by the illusion that arrogance was strength. But in that chamber, under those lights, the illusion would shatter. And when it did, the fall would be public, humiliating, and unforgettable. Cliffhanger. Because for all the years he spent hiding behind arrogance, the one thing he could never escape was the truth, and the truth was about to strike harder than he ever imagined. Long before the cameras, before the packed chamber and the thunderclap of truth that shattered arrogance, there was a different story, the story of the hero. Unlike the attorney, this figure did not arrive in the spotlight by choice. Their path was not paved with smirks and sound bites, but with struggle, sacrifice, and a relentless dedication to something larger than themselves. They were no stranger to adversity. Born into a working-class family, they learned early that dignity was not something handed down by titles or wealth. It was something earned through perseverance. Their parents worked long hours, often juggling multiple jobs, instilling in them the unshakable belief that justice was not an abstract concept, but a lifeline. They carried those lessons like armor, entering adulthood with the kind of resilience arrogance could never manufacture. The courtroom, the chamber, the arena of public debate, these were not foreign to them. But unlike the attorney, they did not see them as theaters. They saw them as battlegrounds for truth. They believed deeply that words mattered, that arguments mattered, not because they won headlines, but because they shaped lives. Every law debated, every policy argued, every precedent set, these things touched real people. And so they treated every appearance not as a performance, but as a responsibility. This outlook shaped their career. Where others sought fame, they sought service. Where others craved applause, they craved progress. They fought cases that few wanted to touch, standing beside the vulnerable, the silenced, the dismissed. They didn't build their reputation with viral clips or dramatic sound bites. They built it with victories that rarely made the news but changed lives in communities across the country. That's why they couldn't be rattled. Arrogance feeds on weakness, but they had no weakness to exploit. They had stood face to face with real hardship, clients who had lost everything, families on the verge of collapse, communities ignored by those in power. After seeing such struggles up close, what was a smirk compared to that? What was bluster against lived truth? And it wasn't just resilience that made them formidable. It was preparation. For weeks leading up to this hearing, they had studied every angle of the attorney's argument, dissecting each claim with surgical precision. They weren't there to match volume with volume. They weren't there to entertain. They were there to end the lie once and for all. This preparation gave them confidence, but not arrogance. They didn't need theatrics. They carried themselves with calm, the kind of calm that unnerves opponents because it cannot be shaken. As the attorney smirked and postured, they sat quietly, listening, waiting. Every word he spoke, every boast he made, tightened the noose he didn't realize he was placing around his own credibility. The hero's presence was steady, grounded, almost magnetic. While the attorney aimed to dominate the room, the hero commanded it through authenticity. You could feel the audience leaning toward them, drawn by something rare, the power of dignity. And behind that calm there was fire. They weren't there just to win a debate. They were there for every person who had been misled, dismissed, or silenced by voices like the attorney's. They carried not only their own truth, but the weight of millions who wanted to see arrogance humbled and honesty restored. That's what made this showdown inevitable. It wasn't just two people in a chamber. It was two worldviews colliding, one built on arrogance, the other on dignity. One propped up by noise, the other fortified by truth. One practiced in theatrics, the other rooted in authenticity. And as the hero sat waiting, hands folded, eyes fixed on the attorney, there was a sense of destiny. This was not a random clash. This was the moment their journeys had been building toward. Every struggle, every sacrifice, every quiet victory that never made headlines, it all pointed here, to this stage, to this battle. And when the attorney leaned into his familiar tricks, when he unleashed his practiced smirk and hollow claims, the hero was not fazed. They were ready. Cliffhanger. Because when arrogance tried its usual trick, this time it wasn't met with silence. It was met with someone armed with more than words. The air in the chamber tightened as the attorney leaned harder into his act. His voice grew louder, his gestures sharper, his words faster. He wasn't speaking to persuade. He was speaking to dominate. Every sentence was delivered like a punchline, each pause filled with his signature smirk, daring anyone to challenge him. To those unfamiliar with his routine, it might have looked convincing. But for those who had seen him before, it was clear. He was doubling down, using volume to mask fragility. The audience sensed the tension rising. Murmurs fluttered through the gallery like sparks catching dry wood. Journalists leaned forward, pens poised. Cameras zoomed in tighter, capturing every flicker of arrogance etched into his face. The attorney thought he was controlling the room, but in reality, the room was turning against him. The hero sat quietly, still, calm. Their silence spoke louder than his bluster. While he threw insults like darts, they didn't flinch. While he repeated his talking points, they simply listened. the kind of listening that unsettles those used to drowning out others. Every second they stayed composed, the attorney's desperation became clearer. He needed the smirk. He needed the noise. Without it, his argument had nothing. And then came the escalation. The attorney, sensing his words weren't landing as easily as before, raised the stakes. He mocked the hero directly, twisting their record, their background, even their motives. He threw out accusations with the arrogance of someone convinced no one would dare call him out. The smirk widened. The insults sharpened. He believed he was winning. But the chamber felt different. For the first time, the audience didn't laugh along with him. They didn't nod in agreement. Instead, they leaned back, uneasy, as though witnessing a performance that had gone on too long. The energy shifted, and though the attorney didn't see it yet, the cameras did. They caught the subtle tilt of heads, the narrowing of eyes, the dawning realization that arrogance was outpacing credibility. The silence from the hero was not weakness, it was strategy. With each insult, with each boast, they let the attorney dig deeper. They knew the truth didn't need to shout. It only needed the right moment to strike, and that moment was drawing closer. The tension thickened into something almost unbearable. Every person in the chamber felt it, the rising heat, the anticipation of a breaking point. It was cinematic, like watching a rope pulled tighter and tighter, knowing it would eventually snap. The attorney kept talking, kept smirking, kept mistaking noise for power, and then came the pause. A silence so sharp it sliced through the room. The attorney's last insult still hung in the air when the hero finally lifted their gaze, meeting his eyes. The chamber froze. The audience leaned forward. Cameras captured the moment. The hero didn't raise their voice. They didn't need to. Because in less than 10 seconds, everything was about to unravel. Cliffhanger. And when the silence broke, it wouldn't just shatter his argument. It would shatter the illusion he had built for years. The silence stretched. It was the kind of silence that unsettles even the most confident performers, the kind that makes a smirk falter. The attorney shifted slightly, his eyes darting across the chamber. He expected interruption, resistance, chaos, but instead he got stillness. A stillness that didn't comfort him, a stillness that felt like the calm before a storm. Then the hero spoke. It wasn't loud, it wasn't rushed. It was measured, precise, and devastating. "You've repeated that line," they said evenly, "in every hearing, every interview, every headline. But you never mention the one fact that undoes it completely." The chamber stirred. Reporters scribbled furiously. The attorney blinked, confused, his smirk twitching like a mask cracking under pressure. The hero leaned in slightly, their voice steady as stone. "The record shows on page 47 of the very document you, waving around that your argument collapses on its own terms. You've read it, you've quoted from it, but you skipped the part that tells the truth." A gasp rippled through the chamber. The audience turned toward the attorney, waiting for a rebuttal. For years, he had thrived on quick comebacks, on the illusion of control, but this time, words didn't come. His lips parted, but no sound followed. The hero didn't stop. "You built your reputation on this claim. You've repeated it so often that people started to believe it, but facts are stubborn. They don't bend for headlines. They don't disappear when ignored. They stand, and today, they stand against you." The weight of those words landed like a hammer. The attorney's eyes flickered, his posture shrinking by degrees. He tried to summon the smirk again, but it slipped away. The cameras captured it, the exact moment arrogance met reality. The murmurs grew louder, spreading like wildfire. Viewers watching live could sense it too. This wasn't just a rebuttal. It was a dismantling, a precision strike designed not only to expose the lie, but to reveal the man behind it. The hero let the silence do its work. They didn't rush to fill it. They didn't gloat. They let the attorney squirm, the chamber breathe, the truth settle like thunderclouds overhead. Finally, the attorney stammered. That's not what it says." But the hero was ready. Calmly, without raising their voice, they read the passage aloud, every word clear, every syllable undeniable. The evidence echoed in the chamber, a drumbeat of truth that drowned out every attempt at spin. The audience erupted, not with noise, but with the collective gasp of realization. Reporters looked at each other wide-eyed, already drafting headlines in their heads. The attorney's face flushed, his papers shuffled nervously, his once commanding tone now reduced to fragments. It was over, and everyone knew it. But the hero didn't stop at exposing the falsehood. They turned the takedown into a lesson. "This chamber doesn't belong to Arrogance," they declared, their voice resonant now, "and it doesn't belong to bluster. It belongs to the truth. And the truth is bigger than any one of us." The chamber, once thick with tension, now pulsed with energy. Heads turned, nodding in agreement. Even some of the attorney's usual allies sat uncomfortably, unwilling to defend what had just been laid bare. The attorney fumbled again, searching for words, but each attempt only deepened the collapse. His once polished rhetoric now sounded hollow, desperate, almost pitiful. The smirk was gone, replaced by a look of disbelief. Disbelief that the act he had performed for years no longer worked. Meanwhile, the hero's composure never wavered. They didn't gloat, didn't mock, didn't mimic the arrogance they had just dismantled. They let the truth do the talking. And in that moment, dignity became the most powerful weapon in the room. The cameras captured it all. Clips would later flood social media, the attorney's smirk fading, his words collapsing, the hero's calm precision slicing through the noise. It was the kind of moment that didn't just end an argument. It created a story that people would replay again and again, each time marveling at the swiftness of the collapse. And yet, for those in the chamber, the most unforgettable part wasn't the collapse itself. It was the look in the attorney's eyes, the dawning realization that his old tricks no longer worked, that arrogance had finally met its limit. The hero ended with a sentence so sharp, so final, it silenced even the whispers. You can repeat a lie 1,000 times, but the truth only needs to be spoken once. The chamber fell silent. For the first time in his career, the attorney had nothing left to say. Cliffhanger. And as the silence spread, it wasn't just the attorney who felt it. The ripple was about to crash far beyond the chamber walls. The silence didn't stay confined to the chamber. Within minutes, the collapse was everywhere. On social media, the clip of the attorney's smirk vanishing spread like wildfire. 10 seconds of video turned into 1,000 interpretations, slow-motion replays, freeze frames, captions like, "That moment he knew it was over." Hashtags surged. Hashtag SmirkDoShock trended within an hour, alongside hashtag Truth Wins and hashtag Attorney Collapse. Users posted memes comparing the attorney's expression before and after the takedown. One viral tweet read, "We just witnessed arrogance dissolve in real time." It was retweeted 100,000 times before the night ended. Commentators jumped in. Cable news panels rolled the footage on repeat, dissecting every second of the exchange. Some marveled at the hero's calm precision. Others highlighted the attorney's visible unraveling. One anchor put it bluntly, "This wasn't a debate. This was a demolition." Podcasts, late-night shows, and influencers all latched on. Edits of the clip appeared with dramatic sound effects, cinematic zooms, and even sports-style commentary. "Ladies and gentlemen," one YouTuber quipped, "we just saw the rhetorical equivalent of a knockout punch. But it wasn't just entertainment. Ordinary people saw something deeper." In community forums, group chats, and kitchen table conversations, people said the same thing. Finally, someone stood up and showed the truth. Teachers shared the clip in classrooms as an example of fact-checking in action. Lawyers analyzed it as a masterclass in courtroom-style dismantling. Activists shared it as proof that bluster only lasts until reality walks in the door. And the attorney, he went quiet. Normally, he'd flood the airwaves, spin the moment, reclaim the narrative, but this time his team released no statement. His silence only amplified the sense of defeat. The absence of his voice became its own story. Meanwhile, the hero's words echoed far beyond the chamber. News outlets quoted the line again and again, "You can repeat a lie 1,000 times, but the truth only needs to be spoken once." It landed not just as a counterpunch, but as a rallying cry. At protests, people carried signs with that phrase printed in bold letters. On TikTok, creators lip-synced the takedown to dramatic music. Even celebrities weighed in, praising the moment as the clip of the year. The ripple effect reached politics itself. Allies of the attorney began distancing themselves, unwilling to defend his collapse. Opponents seized the moment, framing it as proof that arrogance had finally met its match. One rival called it a turning point, a reminder that truth still matters in American life. The more the clip spread, the more it seemed to take on a life of its own. It wasn't just about one man fumbling in the spotlight. It became a parable about power, pride, and the inevitability of truth. In living rooms across the country, ordinary people felt a spark of vindication. For years, they had watched arrogance dominate the stage, watched bluster drown out honesty. But here, for once, the script flipped. Dignity didn't just survive, it triumphed. And that triumph wasn't limited to headlines. Donations surged to organizations aligned with the hero's cause. Volunteers signed up in droves. A sense of momentum grew, fueled not by spin but by the raw, undeniable power of that viral moment. The attorney's collapse wasn't just a personal defeat, it was a cultural shockwave. A reminder that while lies may dominate for a season, truth can shatter them in seconds. And as the hero walked out of the chamber, their head held high, the crowd outside erupted. Cheers, chants, applause, the sound of people who had just witnessed more than a political skirmish. They had witnessed a turning point. Cliffhanger. But as the nation replayed the collapse, one question lingered. What lesson would endure after the shockwaves faded? When the dust settled, the headlines were clear. The attorney's argument hadn't just faltered, it had crumbled in front of the entire nation. But what remained wasn't just the wreckage of arrogance, it was the clarity of a timeless lesson. The hero didn't celebrate with gloating or victory laps. Instead, they reframed the moment into something bigger, something universal. Standing calmly, they reminded everyone watching. Facts don't need to shout. They just need to stand. That line carried more weight than any insult or jab. It was more than a rebuttal. It was a philosophy. In a political era dominated by soundbites, spin, and smirks, the hero delivered something rare: dignity. The moral became crystal clear. Arrogance may win headlines for a day, but truth lasts. Lies can dominate the stage for a season, but they collapse the moment reality walks in. That was the meaning behind the attorney's silence, the smirk erased from his face. Audiences felt it deeply. Parents explained to their kids why it mattered. Teachers used the moment as a real-time civics lesson. Commentators pointed out that in a country weary of division, this clip reminded people of something fundamental. The powerful can try to bend reality, but they cannot escape it forever. It wasn't just about politics anymore. It became about the principle that truth endures. Every pause, every gasp in the chamber that day had proven it. And when arrogance was met with calm, when bluster met dignity, the result wasn't just a win for one person. It was a win for everyone who still believes in integrity. In the weeks that followed, the story didn't fade, it grew. The moment was replayed as an anthem of hope, proof that in an age of noise, there is still power in quiet conviction. The lesson echoed like a chorus. Arrogance is loud, but truth doesn't need volume. Lies can be rehearsed, but honesty flows effortlessly. Power can intimidate, but dignity inspires. And as the attorney's smirk was replaced with silence, the audience saw more than just a collapse. They saw a mirror held up to a culture where arrogance often seems untouchable, and proof that even the untouchable can fall. The hero's message wasn't partisan, it was human. Truth matters, dignity matters. And those who underestimate it will always be caught off guard. By the time the clip reached millions, the smirk was no longer just an expression on one man's face. It became a symbol of arrogance undone. And the hero's calm words became a reminder of what America and humanity has always known deep down. The truth doesn't shout, it doesn't posture. It doesn't smirk, it simply stands. Cliffhanger to outrow. And as that truth spread across the nation, one call remained. Would the people who witnessed it simply watch? Or would they join the movement to ensure dignity always triumphs over arrogance? The attorney walked into that chamber certain of victory. He had the smirk, the rehearsed lines, the polished arrogance that so often carries the day. But in the end, none of it mattered. His argument crumbled under pressure, and the nation saw it happen in real time. That's why this moment resonates far beyond politics. It's a reminder that arrogance is fragile. It may swagger, it may sneer, but when confronted with calm conviction and unshakable truth, it breaks. The attorney-ass smirk didn't just fade, it vanished under the weight of facts he could no longer outrun. And that's the takeaway for all of us. Truth wins, not always instantly, not always loudly, but inevitably. That's why millions shared this clip, why commentators replayed it, and why ordinary people felt empowered. Because if dignity can dismantle arrogance in the highest chambers of power, it can do the same anywhere. This story isn't just about one debate or one collapse. It's about something bigger, the belief that integrity still matters, that arrogance can fall, that when the stakes are highest, the truth still stands. If you believe in that message, if you want more stories where dignity triumphs over bluster, where facts cut through noise, where the powerful are held accountable, then join us. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Share this video with someone who needs to remember that truth is never powerless, and be part of this growing community that refuses to let arrogance define our future. Because as this moment proved, arrogance may smirk, but truth doesn't flinch.